Yeah. So, I mean, as you said, I started off sort of very young, and it all. I suppose I say to everyone, I'm an entrepreneur by default. I think that's the first thing that I want to say is, and the reason I say that is because I think a lot of entrepreneurs set out with the idea of creating a business and creating something that they can employ themselves through and ultimately make money. And for me, that really wasn't the case. At the age of 11, I was diagnosed with lots of different so-called learning disabilities at the time. So dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, many other things, and autism. And so for me, I was home educated from the age of 11 because really there wasn't the support that I needed at school. And so I just kind of fell into chocolate. I'd always been really passionate about food and baking and cooking. And I was lucky that I came from quite a foodie family, but that was it really. And so I ended up creating this product that I sort of poured all of my love and energy and passion into. And it got some local attention and then some wider attention in the UK. And I ended up being the youngest ever supplier to a couple of big sort of quality supermarkets here in the UK. So Waitrose at 13 and Sainsbury's at 14. And I think it was only then when the big sort of supermarket deals came in that I moved to a factory not far from where I lived. That's kind of when it dawned on me. And I remember there was actually a press article that called me an entrepreneur for the first time. And I had to look it up to find out what it really meant. I had no understanding of what being an entrepreneur was. So I always say to people, I fell into it. It was really my passion and drive to do something in the world that got me there. It certainly wasn't that I set out to be a businessman or an entrepreneur. Yeah, sure. So I think over the years you realize that you gain so many more skills, but I think that when that really starts to happen is I think that where a lot of people like me, the entrepreneurs by default, it's I feel like there's a transition in between being a creative, being somebody that makes something that has a business, to somebody that has a business that makes things. And so I think what that transition really is understanding you're an entrepreneur and cultivating the skills of being an entrepreneur. And so I think that when that really starts to happen, and I think for me, I was really lucky that that happened when I was probably about 14 years old. And so I started being mentored by business owners, by people that had got a lot of experience within specific sectors like advertising and branding and marketing and sales. And so I really realized that for me to progress, I was no longer really just a chocolatier or a baker. I was actually a businessman and an entrepreneur. And I think that I really went about over the next, so many years cultivating those skills and really understanding that I think, a business in a way, actually, that the product and the service is a relatively small part of actually what you do. It's the kind of what. And so what I really started to learn is that to grow a business and to grow rapidly but sustainably as well, you needed to learn so many other things. And so I think that there was a period of time where I really became a chocolatier, and then there was this entrepreneur phase, which meant that I really pushed myself to be the managing director or the CEO of the company. So, marketing, branding, and business development were the sort of three pinnacle aspects of really what I realized drove my company forwards. It was the sort of front line of the revenue cycle. And so that, the branding encompasses the personality and all of the consumer psychology and subconscious cues to why people make a decision. The marketing is the connectivity between that brand and that psychology and the consumer. And the business development really is about sort of lead generation and closing leads. And so I spent a huge amount of time doing that, and that's really what I was focused on in the chocolate business for most of my time. But of course, also as a founder, I think it's a great experience for anybody, because you end up learning about numeracy and mathematics and accountancy and HR and all of these different things, even down to organizational structuring. That's something that I got really into with my own business, is really how do I make things as efficient as possible. And that started with us going paperless as an office, back in 2008, I was using all of the available technology back then, which really wasn't a lot, but we were still trying to maximize our use of technology to increase efficiency. And so, yeah, I think that's the beauty of being a founder and entrepreneur is there's not one skill that you learn. You might be better and have a more of a skill and a strength within certain areas, but ultimately you end up with this real breadth of knowledge that you have to have because you run a business. And then I think you've got the depth of certain bits where you're strongest. Sure. So I think for me, there was also a transition in the business that, as I was talking about before, that, being and stepping into that entrepreneur role. And I think because I was a young entrepreneur and I got in an awful lot of press, both UK and overseas, I started very, very early on to be asked to speak to audiences. And that started off with small business groups in the Midlands in the UK, and grew quite quickly to some of the world's largest corporate organizations and international speaking. So I always kind of had this sort of other life, if you like, this other hat that was me as a teacher, I suppose, even though I've never really sort of felt in that. But at the same time, I think there was this speaking role. And so quite early on, again in 2008, I started to be asked to do some consultancy for other companies, began in the food industry. So, mainly sort of food, beverage, hospitality. And then as that sort of speaking career really started to take off while I was still in the chocolate business, I ended up picking up clients in a huge varied number of different sectors and industries, and everything from really small micro businesses all the way up to, like I said, some of the largest corporates across the world. So again, I had this sort of other hat, as I said, sort of simmering away in the background of when I was running the chocolate business. And as the years went on, and so really it was up until about 2012 that I started to realize that the chocolate business was facing some big challenges. So I was really presented with some big choices, and that was that raw material prices were going through the roof constantly. So chocolate and cacao and sugar and milk powder and all these things were increasing in price every single year. But the retail price as consumers and across, obviously, towards the end of the business, we were exporting 17 countries around the world. So, I had this decision to make: either do I give up some of my beliefs in sustainability and quality, which were very, very core to the values of my business, or do I move on to new ventures and adventures? And I chose the latter. Really, for me, the whole reason I started the chocolate company was to be a company that really stood for something, and sustainability was very key to that. And so I'd got this great sort of booming consultancy and speaking business. And over the years, I was doing more and more of that. I was loving helping other people build and grow businesses and watch my clients sort of prosper and generate more revenue and impact. And so actually it was a really easy transition for me as I saw this happening in the chocolate industry. I started to make the decision in 2012, 2013 that I would start to wind the company down and sell off certain parts of assets and white label contracts. I got approached, big companies wanted to buy the brand, but because at that time it was my name, it was Louis Barnett Chocolates, I decided not to do that. And it took me a couple of years, but by the end, December of 2015, I exited the chocolate business, sold off all of our last sort of production sites, machinery, and contracts, and decided to move full time into helping others build and develop businesses. And it is something I've been super passionate about. And I think the chocolate business gave me that great breadth and depth of experience, and allowed me to have a business that was really versatile but also really creative as well. So I got to test out lots of theories in sort of branding, marketing, and business development and consumer psychology. And I think as a consultant, I've actually been there and done some of it myself. I'll never say that I know everything, nobody does, but I've had a good experience from building a business on my parents' kitchen table to 8 years later selling to 17 countries. And hopefully that's it now. I transfer all of what I learned to my clients and help them grow their businesses. Yeah, so the last couple of years, I think for us all have been an unusual time. Particularly I think the last 12 months, definitely. And so I have noticed that sort of last year, I think like everyone, it was a little bit up and down from time to time. I think, a lot of companies were building up to do launches or marketing campaigns or new websites. And I think that, across the board, there was just this worry about what was really going to happen. So I think that what I found last year was that we were doing a lot, but they're probably over a longer time period. Companies wanted to really tread water and see what was happening over the year. And I think usually, like most, January and February for me are a time where people are coming out of Christmas and they're sort of slowly building up to the spring, and then everyone seems to really sort of take off and get things done and think about the year ahead. But yeah, it's been incredible that actually the last 3 months have been my busiest months um, since really ever starting consultancy. It's been an incredible experience to work with so many different businesses across so many different sectors. So everything from sort of artisan and high quality jewelry manufacturers to IT consultancy and companies, all the way up to tech businesses, both based in the US and Germany and the UK. So there's been a real breadth of different businesses that I've been working with. But I think that I'm really excited for the year ahead. I think that last year was tough for all of us, in business and our personal lives. But I think that there seems to me to now be a lot of excitement about the year ahead, and a lot of companies are now looking at how can they make up sometimes for lost time, or at least they're thinking now about not just surviving but really growing that business. And so the great thing I think about also working with so many different businesses is I get to do so many different things. So, everything from sort of the basic branding from a design and creative point of view, up to building websites, launching influencer campaigns, and integrating technology across a lot of clients' businesses to help them be more sort of digital ready and be more efficient as companies. So, I'm super appreciative of the last sort of 3-4 months. It's been a great time, and as I said, I think it paves the way. I really feel for the year to come ahead. I think my focus really with the clients now that I'm working with is I suppose twofold in a way is a looking at this digitization piece that I think the last year has shown us all that we need to be thinking about future proofing our businesses. We need to be thinking about what does the next 10 years look like? How can we digitize or make our businesses more digitally efficient? And for a lot of companies, that means going direct to consumer for sort of larger businesses with retail presence. But for a lot of other B2B businesses, it's about how can we still make things personal in a digital space. And so I think really that's where I always come back to consumer psychology. I think digital is a very important thing, and it makes up a huge percentage of everything that I do as a consultant now. But I think we can't forget that our human psychology is more triggered from our five senses. And I talk a lot about the limbic brain. It's the seat of all of our emotions and also all of our five senses. So I think that really is the challenge: is how can we bridge those two gaps? And I suppose that's really the work that I'm most excited about over the next year or two. Sure. So I think that there's a lot of difference in running a serviced and product based business, and I've been on both sides of the fence, obviously B2B and B2C. And in many times with clients' businesses, I'm still dipping out in and out of both. I've got a lot of clients. It's probably a relatively equal spread in between B2B and B2C businesses. So I think that what it really comes down for me is actually at its most simplistic level, they're all the same. the way in which people buy, and this comes back to the limbic brain, it's that emotional seat of why we do what we do. And there's a huge amount of research out there at the moment about this subject now, and really pointing out that as a society, we don't really often know why we do what we do, and why we buy the things that we do, and why we choose the services that we do. And so I think that really, for me, comes down to the very fundamental principle, which is I personally feel like there's two types of businesses. One is a transactional, logical based business, and that purely means somebody that is selling on service and product and features and price. And that's really their focus around what they're doing. And the advantages of that kind of business are that you can use a lot of let's call it questionable marketing tactics. You'll sort of do anything to get a sale. The disadvantage really is that obviously when it's a transactional business, if you stop advertising and marketing to that customer demographic, chances are they're not going to remember you, and they're probably not going to come back and buy from you unless you stay price sensitive, competitive within your marketplace. And I really think that's the hard way of doing business. I think the much easier way of doing business, and it's the same for B2B or B2C products or service, is an emotional, brand driven business. So this is really all about understanding that we don't make logical decisions when we buy products and services in the majority. We're making emotional decisions. And the better that you can understand that, the better you can start to really ask yourself, why do my customers really buy what I'm offering? And when you start to peel back the layers, they're very similar with one or the other. I would say that with a B2C brand, of course, that consumer tends to be buying, I would estimate, at probably 80% and above emotional decision making, with a little bit of logic fitted in there as well. I think with B2B, it's probably more like 60% emotional, maybe 70. So there's a slight difference in, I think a B2B product is a slightly more logical. But I think when you look at, if you imagine a sort of funnel, where the emotion is the top of the funnel, then you start to move down, and it's only at the bottom that people are then making that final logical decision. So people still come in the funnel and out the same way. It's just that last piece, how much does that factor in? And ultimately that comes down to marketplace fit and price. But I think if you've got that right, that B2C or B2B, they're all the same really in many ways. I mean, I think that I was very lucky that in my B2C business, we had a huge amount of variety, which I think I've always needed in my life. I'm quite an eclectic guy. And so I always needed that variety and sort of spice of life in what I did. And we had thousands of different products across multiple ranges being exported all around the world, and most of those products were translated packaging and specific and bespoke. So I think I kind of brought that through into now really what is a B2B business, is me working with a wide variety of different clients. But I also think that it's a great challenge to be doing that, to constantly be trying to, as I said, fit that funnel to a particular marketplace and product. But as I said, for me, it always comes down to the same things. The brand really is the personality of that product or service or organization. The marketing is the communication tool that you can leverage a lot of the limbic brain and emotional selling. And then finally, really, the product, it is the third, or the product or service is the third most important factor of that decision that's being made by a buyer or consumer. Sure. So, I mean, I think it's difficult to give broad advice, I think, to such a large subsection of companies. But I think that the first thing, and broken record, here I am, emotional selling is such an important thing that I think 99%, particularly SME, small to medium enterprise businesses, really need to understand most. Because, as I said, the biggest businesses in the world, that's the way that they're thinking. They're thinking about emotional selling as their primary tactic. They're not thinking about the logical aspects. A lot of the companies that we know and love, they don't even do any market research. So that's the first thing, is really understanding that if you want your consumers to keep coming back and buying from you and being loyal, you have to understand consumer psychology and emotional selling. That's the first thing. And I think, secondly, this speaks to that to some extent, but I think that for me, the most important thing as an entrepreneur and learning over the years has been purpose. And so I think purpose wakes me up every morning and gets me out of bed and makes me passionate about what I do. But I think ultimately, as well, from a product or a service or business point of view, it's really key to be clear about what that purpose really is. What's the why? The why do you actually exist? And ultimately, why should a customer or a client care about your product or service? Now, it does relate back to the emotional selling, but I think that as an entrepreneur, that purpose is so important. And I've seen so many businesses and entrepreneurs fail over the years that have had, one goal in mind, and that was money. And don't get me wrong, we all need to pay the bills, but I think that for me, purpose is a much greater driver and a much more important thing for us as entrepreneurs to really discover that purpose within ourselves. And then I think finally is actually understanding our own psychology. So consumer psychology, without a doubt, will drive your business forward and will grow revenue and create long-term sustainable growth. But one thing that we can't forget as entrepreneurs is we take our own psychology and mental health to work with us. We don't leave it at the door of the office, or we don't leave it in the kitchen while we're on a call. And so I think that understanding our own psychology as business leaders and entrepreneurs is a really critical step to make if we want to be able to perform, at our best, at our highest, and inspire the people around us to want to work with us, not under threat of being, fired or losing their job, but actually to want to work with us in that common purpose. And so I think that first is your own psychology, and then is actually the psychology of the people around you, and that then creates a cycle. And I think, it's, for me, it's all about psychology. It's understanding, what that looks like in your business. And I think as one final lesson really that I learned was that it's okay to learn from your own mistakes, and that's a very important thing for us to do as business owners and as entrepreneurs. I've made many of them, so many that I probably couldn't count, but actually it's sometimes better if we can learn from others' mistakes. And so I think that actually connecting with others and mentors or coaches, is something actually that I think all of us should explore. Now, you have to be really discerning with whose advice you listen to. But I think ultimately, if you find those people that you really resonate with, as I said, it sometimes helps a lot learning from others' mistakes instead of always making our own.